Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 6th. If you were just tuning in, we've just gone over just about all of the moves that have happened at the trade deadline. We are completely up to date, and now we're on to winners and losers. As always, there are winners and there are losers in these types of things. We're going to make sure we hit each and every one of them. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 6th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the winners and losers here for the NBA trade deadline. There are always winners and there are always losers. We're going to start off with the winners here. Of course, we have to have the Lakers on this list. The Lakers are able to make off like bandits. They take what some people might have thought would have only turned into one major star and take it into the surprise move of the season, right? They turn Anthony Davis and a handful of assets into Luka Doncic and Mark Williams. That is a dangerous, dangerous team now. That starting five is going to be a problem, right? Projected starting five after all the moves. You've got Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, LeBron James, and Mark Williams. That is a dangerous starting five, and it absolutely moves them up into the upper echelons of contender in the NBA. There's no other team that can say they moved up a tier in terms of their chance of winning it all like the Lakers did. For every winners, there are losers here. And I think the Suns are one of the biggest losers in this one. The Suns stood pat with what they had. And the Suns clearly knew that it wasn't working. They were on the phones, making those trade markets move. They were in on the Jimmy Butler market, right? They were in on a potential 3-team trade that involved the Heat, the Warriors, KD, or Bradley Beal, right? These are guys that they were looking at moving some of those big contracts. The Suns have to pay the most money in the luxury tax. They're over the second apron by the most. They don't have any flexibility. They're kind of stuck with what they have as a team, especially when their stars just aren't interested in moving or working with them or readjusting their contracts. It's going to put them in a bad spot. The Suns' team design was already not very good, right? They have 3 scorers of the basketball, not a lot of defenders, and they've tried their best to go and fix that. They've tried to build out a competent bench unit, which they've really struggled doing. They've tried to build out some kind of defense, which they've really struggled doing. And I give them credit. They've done a better job this season than they did last season, but injuries have hurt them a little bit. And the fact that they weren't able to move off of any of those major contracts in a year where they were rumored from the beginning to be some of those major players in a lot of these trade scenarios, they just weren't able to get anything done. And because of that, they're a big loser. Back on the winners' sides of things, the Spurs, one of the biggest winners in this. And it's obviously because they got one of the bigger names. And it's not just because they got the biggest name, but because how it's going to set them up for the future. You have a young guard in De'Aaron Fox. He's going to be able to play with Victor Wembanyama, theoretically, for their entire career. This wasn't a move that the Spurs made aggressively. This was a move that they had in reaction to De'Aaron Fox saying that he wants to go and play with Victor Wembanyama. That is a great sign for the future of the Spurs. Not just the fact that they get their guard of the future, but the fact that guys are coming and flocking to play with Victor Wembanyama. It's going to be a lot easier to build a team. You might be able to get players at a discount. You might be able to build this team faster than they previously thought. And getting that first step and showing that interest that NBA guys have in playing with your star player is going to be massive. Now, it all depends on how these two gel. I can't see a world where they don't gel pretty good together, but I can see a world where it doesn't live up to all their expectations. I don't think this automatically puts them into the tier where they're going to make the playoffs 100% this year. They're kind of just on that outside looking in kind of tier in the Western Conference, a Western Conference that's pretty top heavy right now. It doesn't mean that they don't have a chance. I think this is a very, very talented Spurs team. They've got a lot of young talent there as well. So if not this year, then they're going to continue to make those steps up. And with a guy like De'Aaron Fox at the helm, being a number 2 guy for Victor Wembanyama, that's going to be massive for them. And I think that's the perfect role for De'Aaron Fox to play. Another loser, obviously, it's the Mavericks. But I don't think the Mavericks are as big of losers as everybody is making it out to be. Obviously, when you give up a guy like Luka Doncic at age 25, a guy who has made the first team All-Pro all but one season in his entire career, has the 5th most All-Pro first team All-Pro selections in the entire NBA, and it's just 25, you're going to be a loser. But the fact that they weren't able to get that much compensation back, other than Anthony Davis, who, if these two were the same age, if instead of Anthony Davis being 7 years older than Luka Doncic, they were both 25, this trade might have looked better for the Mavericks. And like I've said before, this trade for the Mavericks, in a vacuum of it just being one season or just being 2 seasons, isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I love the vision of a Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis built team alongside a Klay Thompson that can still be an effective 3-point shooter at times, right? You've got a really solid defense now, one that was top 8 in the league last year, even with the deficiencies of Luka Doncic on that defensive end, and you get one of the best two-way players in the league. Now, it sucks when you lose the franchise face, right? It sucks that the fans are dejected now, but I still think this is a Mavericks team that can make a little bit of a run. They're still on the loser side of this all, but it doesn't mean that they don't have a shot of making any kind of noise in the playoffs this year at all. Another winner from this year, I think the Warriors were as close to winners as they possibly could have been. They didn't have to give up too much to get a second star for Steph Curry, and they were desperate for a second star. They're not A-plus winners. If I had to give them a grade for the deadline, I'd probably give them like a B-, right? They were able to get that second star in Jimmy Butler without giving up too much, only 1 first-round pick, and it's a top 10 protected pick. So if anything were to happen this season, they still have that protection. They had to give up a lot of money. They're able to Jimmy Butler. $60 million a year is a lot of money for a guy in Jimmy Butler who hasn't been the most consistent regular season player, but in the playoffs, he's worth all that money and more, at least through his history, right? Getting Steph Curry, a guy that can step up when they need him to. Getting Steph Curry, a guy that can be relied on when the rest of the team isn't stepping up, like they've had so many problems this season, especially at the end of games. Having a guy that can close it out, keep the energy up when they need the energy to stay up, even when they're up big. That's been something that the Warriors have struggled with. I think Jimmy Butler can help with that a lot. And I think this was a really good move for them. Obviously, this isn't going to catapult them into that next tier, but I do think that the Warriors are a winner from this week of NBA trades. A team that I think is a loser is the Hawks, right? The Hawks had to give up a lot of players that I think they would have liked to build around. They're kind of stuck in NBA purgatory right now, where as long as they have Trae Young, which I don't see a world where they end up giving up Trae Young, they're going to continue to be good but not great. They're kind of falling into that trap that the Bulls were with Zach LaVine, except they're a little bit better than the Bulls, right? Trae Young is a guy that I think at this point just needs to find a new home. He doesn't, or the Hawks need to start tanking, right? And I think they started moving towards that tanking side, but not too far, right? This is a Hawks team that's lost 2 games to the Wizards, who, by the way, have now won 3 straight games. Pretty crazy over there in Washington. But I don't like the way that this Hawks team is moving. They seem to be taking big steps into the winning side, and then just a couple seasons later, they're saying, you know what? No, we're going to take a couple steps toward the losing side. I don't love the moves that they made. There's a couple guys that could potentially turn out, but the way that they were making moves at this deadline was more like some of those bottom feeder teams that were trying to stockpile weapons and picks and players and eat salary for these contenders teams. I just don't love the way that they handled this deadline. The final winner that I have, and it's a little bit weird here, but the Charlotte Hornets, I think, did a really good job. What they were able to get as far as compensation for Mark Williams was arguably, at least in draft capital, it was more than what the Mavs were able to get for Luka Doncic, and that's pretty impressive, right? These aren't going to be earth-shattering picks. These aren't going to be earth-shattering trades. But I do like the fact that they were able to stockpile effectively. They didn't have to give up their core that they had. They gave up a great player, one great player in Mark Williams, who is kind of a gamble anyway because he's had his injury issues. I really do like the way that they handled it. They were able to get the pieces that they need as well as start to build towards the future. They're in that forever rebuild, but I think they're starting to get close. And I really like the way that they handled this trade deadline. And the final loser that I have, that's the Miami Heat. Yeah, the Miami Heat here were a team that we talked about a little bit earlier on in our show. They just were unable. They were kind of handcuffed by the fact that Jimmy Butler was being loud about everything. He was being dramatic about everything, and he was yelling and screaming and throwing a fit the whole time, right? Jimmy Butler made it incredibly hard for the Heat to trade him, and because of that, the Heat ended up with just a handful of players and one protected first-round pick. The Heat go out there, and they should have gotten more value for Jimmy Butler. All the things that we talk about Jimmy Butler being, he's still a top 15 player in the NBA. He's a guy that can go out there on any given night and be the best player on the court. We've seen it happen many times in the playoffs. He's led this Heat team to a couple of finals appearances. He's upset a plenty of teams. He's been really good when the moment counts the most. And the fact that the Heat were able to get just one okay player in Andrew Wiggins, who can step up as well, and a first-round pick, as well as plenty of assets being sent all over the league, is wild to me. It's not a good look for the Heat, and they were just kind of stuck. They were held hostage by Jimmy Butler. They did the best they could, but I still would have liked to seen them get more. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Who were the biggest winners? Who were the biggest losers of this year's NBA trade deadline? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, some big news around baseball. Pete Alonso has found his new home. We'll talk about where that is and what that means for his new team coming up in the 2025 MLB season. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.